And hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's iWoman Report. I'm Cathleen Trigg-Jones. Just days after the Supreme Court struck down a new law restricting gun carrying rights, another mass shooting has devastated our country and shattered what should have been a weekend of peaceful celebrations commemorating Independence Day. It is the Supreme Court's most important judgment on guns in over a decade. It expands gun rights at a time when gun violence and mass shootings are at an all-time high. We will have the latest developments on that Highland Park shooting that killed 7 people, and also more details about the shooter who was taken into custody peacefully, raising the question of whether white suspects and black suspects are treated differently by police across the board. It's also Minority Health Awareness Month. In case you didn't know, we're going to explain why it's so important for minorities to zone in on the health issues most impacting the black and brown communities. But first, let's get the latest on that mass shooting that rocked our nation July 4th weekend. It happened in Highland Park, Illinois, in the middle of an Independence Day parade. Not surprisingly, it was not the only shooting to take place. In fact, according to an NBC News analysis on gun violence in America, the 4th of July is the deadliest holiday when it comes to mass shootings.
But last night he thought he was hearing fireworks, but no, he was actually hearing gunfire. And the reason he knows that for certain is because a bullet actually went right through his door. Luckily, it did not hit him, but this was all part of a very violent night across the city. Actually hearing
220 people were shot and killed by guns over the July 4th holiday weekend. Philadelphia, the Bronx, and Brooklyn all experienced gun violence on the holiday. The shootings that continue not only highlight the massive issues America has with guns, but proves that racism is still extremely prevalent in our judicial system. The difference between how white and black suspects are treated by law enforcement is sickening.
This is just another example of how a black individual is treated differently than a white individual. I mean, we just watched someone who shot into a parade and killed 6 people was taken without violence. A young black man on a traffic stop somehow posed a threat and was killed, gunned down with over 60 wounds to his body.
I mean, for a traffic stop, really, you have to gun him down, get his license plate and run it, and then you can pick it up later. You didn't have to chase him down the expressway.
I don't know if you had an opportunity to see any of the videos surfacing online about Jayland Walker, the 25-year-old black man that they referenced in that video. But he was shot over 60 times by police in Akron, Ohio, spurring a week of protest and imposing a curfew there in Ohio. His crime? Fleeing from a traffic stop. Right. He fled from a traffic stop. No gun was found on him. Police say that he fired a bullet out of his window, but that hasn't been proven yet. Meanwhile, the 22-year-old man in Highland Park, Illinois, suspected of killing 7 people and injuring over 30 others, was peacefully arrested and taken into custody without incident.
We can't afford to have adrenaline junkies with guns that go on police chases for a broken taillight, and it ends in the death of a citizen. The death penalty is not what's prescribed for a traffic violation. The FBI articulated that there's an infiltration of white supremacists in law enforcement. The majority of law enforcement officers in this country are white males. There has to be a purging, and it has to start at the national level.
Robert Crimo III, the Highland Park suspected shooter, is of course white. Jayland Walker is of course black. This brings me to my question of the day. Have you or a family member ever experienced a run-in or any police violence firsthand? And do you feel that it was racially motivated? I want to hear your stories. Elaborate a little bit. I want us to have a healthy discussion about the disparities with how white and black suspects are treated. You can go leave your comments at iWomanTV to answer the poll. Talk about it. This will be an ongoing conversation. Police bombing in Michigan, meanwhile, is under investigation after it was discovered of black men for their target practice. This disturbing practice was reported by a Boy Scouts troop during a field trip to the police department in April. In a statement by the Farmington Hills police chief, he said the photos were purchased, but they did not state why or where they were from. The images used were intended to represent a mixture of threat and non-threatening targets. although the Boy Scouts only saw the black men that were used as targets. In order to train officers, they said, on implicit bias and supposedly contained photos of both white and black men. Well, the police chief apologized that they did not explain the context of the photos while the Boy Scouts were on their field trip, but the practice of the trainings has come into question. The department is undergoing an investigation, and meanwhile, all the images, of course, used in this kind of training have been taken down for now. However, Farmington Hills Councilman Michael Bridges hopes that this incident will result in the end of this practice and that the police department can find a better way to train for implicit bias.
The fact is, we took them down, and I want them permanently taken down and not never used again in our community. Part of my efforts of being on council for the last 14 years, I've been very active on the issue of making sure our workforce is diverse, and secondly, in that we have police equity in our policing.
Councilman Bridges says since January 2021, he's been calling on the city to hire a DEI or a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. Chief King says that decision would come from city administration.
Again, I ask, why does it take a Boy Scout troop showing adults, grown adults, law enforcement, lawmakers, what's right and wrong? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, let's switch gears. July, in case you didn't know, is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. Actually, as of 2020, July is now known as Black and Indigenous People of Color, or BIPOC, Mental Health Awareness Month.
And the need is twofold: to remove the stigma associated with mental health and also to create awareness in communities of color about the need for mental health. Racism is a public health crisis. So everyone has to deal with life stressors. When you are a person of a community of color, that is almost intensified. So everything is experienced in addition to possibly microaggressions with life.
You know, I never actually heard it broken down like that, but everyone deals with mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and other kinds of trauma. However, it is more important to carve out specific time to acknowledge the unique experiences of BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color, that may contribute to mental health struggles and disparities in care. According to Mental Health America, racism is a mental health issue because racism causes trauma, deep, long-lasting trauma, which can eventually lead to race-based traumatic stress, RBTS. I had never even heard of that before. Anyone who experiences a sudden, emotionally painful or uncontrollable racist encounter can suffer from RBTS. This epidemic of police violence against Black people only intensifies the immense amount of stress that they face every single day of their lives. In fact, Black adults are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than white adults. BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month is just one in a long list of things that we can do to be better and to better serve communities who are suffering. Suicide rates among young Black men are the highest that they have ever been. The Black maternal death rate is climbing, and young Black kids are constantly turning on the TV and seeing people who look just like them get senselessly targeted and too often killed by the police. It is especially important now to pay attention to kids in communities of color who experience an added layer of fear and potential trauma on top of the pandemic, shootings, and war that we see happening every day.
Just like you mentioned, there's so much that has happened. COVID, the pandemic, all the different shootings that have occurred most recently this weekend. And it's important to recognize that we all have an emotional response that's normal, but mental health, we have to start considering that when it starts affecting our daily lives in terms of children, adolescents, academics kind of dropping, plummeting, children not wanting to get out of bed because they're just so tired, or alterations in sleep, appetite, irritability, spending more time alone and away from the family. Those are all different things that we can recognize. Lives.
And to be clear, everyone has the potential to be struggling at this moment. I mean, with the war, with the gun violence, there's so many, the pandemic, there's so many different things going on. If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health and suicidal thoughts, you can always call the Suicide Prevention Hotline. That number is 800-273-8255. Again, 1-800-273-8255. And this brings me to my thought of the day. You know, it seems like almost every day that we are hearing about another senseless shooting somewhere in America. New York leaders came up with a solution for lowering gun violence in the state, endorsed by both New York City Mayor Eric Adams as well as Governor Kathy Hochul, and the Supreme Court struck it down. At times, it seems the leaders on the highest court in the country care more about their right to bear arms than the safety and well-being of the people who live here. What reason could there ever be for having an assault rifle on the streets in our country? An assault weapon has one use and one use only: to kill. As a mother and a human being who cares deeply about humanity, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired over the innocent lives that are lost every time someone who shouldn't have a gun in the first place gets a hold of a gun, legally, mind you, and infringes upon the rights that every single human being in our country, in our world, should have to stay alive and feel protected in their community. They say America is the greatest place on earth, but how can we claim that when we have the highest gun violence rate of any developed country in the world? The Highland Park shooter, in case you didn't know, was on his way to shoot up another community, but he decided it wasn't planned out well enough, so he didn't execute his plan. Another potential mass shooting was also averted in Richmond, Virginia on the 4th of July after someone overheard the plan and called in an anonymous tip to the police to stop it. We've got to do better. And if our Supreme Court justices and the lawmakers we put into office are not going to be big enough to make the tough decisions necessary to keep us all safe, then we need to not be afraid to make the tough decisions to get them out of office when the time comes to vote. In the meantime, if you see something or you hear something, you can't be afraid to say something. All of our lives depend on it. That's going to do it for this iWoman Report. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Until the next time, everyone, please stay healthy, stay happy, and stay safe.